One of the things, some of the other things that have to do with this time period is going to be the idea of fighting on multiple fronts. Once we get involved in the war, we're going to have we're going to have multiple fronts in Europe, and then we're going to have what we call two different theaters in the war. We're going to have the Pacific theater, where we're going to be fighting the Japanese, and then we have the European theater where we're fighting the Italians and the Germans. And due to this, especially and then multiple fronts are going to be in Europe. And this is going to be an important aspect, especially when we look at the D-Day invasion and its impact on fighting on multiple fronts, because it's going to kind of split the priorities of the German and Italian military. A person that you will come across during World War II is going to be George Marshall. George Marshall is the general that served as chief of staff to FDR, and he's going to be what we call the organizer of victory and for his contribution in the war effort. So moving on to the Pacific Theater, this is going to be an area where it's mostly the Americans fighting the Japanese. And our major events during this era, so one of the strategies during the war was the idea of island hopping. And the goal of island hopping was to liberate these Pacific islands from Japanese control one at a time. And then at the same time, we're getting closer and closer to Japanese territory where we can make an impact, maybe a future bombing. Another major event with the Pacific area, this is actually going to happen right after, not long after Pearl Harbor and the Bataan Death March. This is in the Philippines, which was, they were invaded by the Japanese army the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. And remember, the Philippines were a U.S. territory at this time. So the U.S. and Filipino forces surrendered to the Japanese, and then the Japanese forced the prisoners to take a 60-mile march through the Philippine jungle known as the Bataan Death March. And it's considered that because they faced starvation, disease, exposure to the sun and no water during this time. And of the about 5,000 Americans, which is going to be half of the American POWs, are going to die on the 60-mile march through the Philippine jungle. Some are going to be from violent deaths, bayoneted, shot, beheaded. Some were just left to die along the road due to these issues right here. So again, this is going to be another sad moment in the Pacific theater of World War II for the U.S. So the only major battle that you're really going to need to know for the Pacific part of the war is going to be the Battle of Midway. And that's because it is a major turning point in the Pacific Ocean. The reason why it's going to be a turning point is it's going to severely damage the Japanese Navy. And it's a turning point because it's going to halt Japanese advance in the Pacific. A major person that you may need to know from this one is Admiral Chester Nimitz. And he was the admiral that was appointed commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet. So again, we just talked about Nimitz. He's going to be the admiral of the Pacific Fleet. Another person you may need to know from the Pacific realm of the war is Douglas MacArthur, who is going to be commander of the Army in the Pacific.